Good morning, everybody. Man, so I got to be honest with y'all. I know everybody. I got to be honest with you. Everybody automatically assumes it's a bad thing. Um, Actually, I will never forget this. Um, it wasn't long after Raquel and I started here at Sweetwater. I was. We had been here. We'd been leading worship. We were the worship leaders here for several months, and the pastor who had been here one Sunday he came and he sat down here in the front on a stool to announce that he was going to be resigning his position because he had had some other life changes that happened, and he wasn't going to be able to devote the amount of time to the church that he wanted to, and so he that kind of was the precedent that had been set. And so there was one Sunday I was coming in and I was going to share my story, like just mine. Everybody got to hear mine and Raquel's story Sunday night, but I was going to share my story. And so I came in and I didn't like being behind a pulpit. I still don't like being behind a pulpit or a podium when I speak. I like to be able to move around. And so when I would speak, when I would preach, I would come down on floor level. And this particular week, I did something I had never done before. I brought a stool with me. And I set it right smack dab in the middle of the aisleway. And I sat down on the stool and said, I need to tell y'all a story. And everybody in that moment thought, oh my gosh, they're going to leave too. And I have always, ever since then, I have always tried to make sure that however I open up things, however I open a conversation, I want to try to alleviate as much tension as possible. But this morning, I really do. I feel like I need to be honest with you guys. Because I think there are times that we all need to understand that people like me that come up here, they do this for a living, which is still weird to me to say that I'm a professional Christian. Like it's a weird thought process for me. But I need for y'all to, and this is why I want to be honest with y'all, because I need for y'all to understand what goes through my head sometimes, okay? This morning we got up, and Raquel and I, we were getting ready, we were getting dressed and all that, and I came into our room, and I stood there for a second, and I just kind of had my eyes closed. And I told Raquel, I said, I don't feel right this morning. Not health-wise, just mentally, I just did not feel right. There's those moments where you wake up sometimes, and like you guys, you wake up and you're like, man, I just don't want to go to work today. I just want to stay in bed. I just want to veg. I want to relax. And I need for y'all to know it's no different for people like me. There are days that I wake up and say, God, why do I even bother? Why am I even going to go? Because the reality is, as a pastor, sometimes you walk into a room or you come into a scenario like this, you have conversations with people and you hear them struggling with things that you've been talking to them about and pouring into them about for weeks or months, and in some cases even years. And you say, God, they're just not even listening. Like, so why am I even going to go? Why am I even going to get out of the bed? Why am I going to even put forth the effort to get dressed and go and even put on a happy face when I don't feel it at all? And the truth is, and I have to remind myself this, and today was one of those days, I don't do this for me. It's not about how I feel. It's not about what's going on inside of me. It's not about even what's going on outside of my marriage, outside of the things that I can't control. It's not about those things. And I'm going to be honest with you. Sometimes I laugh at God sometimes, and Raquel will say this, like, this last week, there were several little things that happened, and I got myself all worked up over it. It was just little things, wasn't anything major. And we were sitting at the table eating dinner on our back porch, and I was complaining about all the stuff that was going on that were things outside of my control. I'd done everything I could do except for the one thing that I did wrong and messed up and caused more headache and tension. And everybody said, listen, it's okay, it's okay. And I said, I know, just be still, right? Be still. And it was one of those times where we laugh because it's like whatever God lays on my heart to bring to you guys, we laugh because it feels like we have to experience it in our home. Or yeah, she said, finally, you're the one having to go through it. But it's one of those things that even like this morning, I was sitting here and I was like, God, why do I feel like this? Why am I feeling this way? And some of you realize, and most of you may not, but when we're done running over the music in here for everything that I'm a part of from the keyboard or that I'm playing, I disappear. I try to disappear for at least 30 minutes. And I go to my office and I'm just quiet and I pray and I ask God, what is it definitely that you want me to make sure that I learn from this and that I get out to everybody? And this morning, it was one of those moments that's like, I just need you to really pay attention. I just need you to pay attention to what you're saying. Not because, and I want you to, it's not because of anything that I'm saying wrong or anything, but it's because, and I started looking back over my outline and I was like, you're funny. If you don't think God has a sense of humor, just pay attention to the world around you. Because, I started last week by saying how a lot of times when a new year rolls around, we make all these decisions that we're going to do things a different way. And what typically happens is when we realize after the first couple of weeks that we've not really changed anything, we start beating ourselves up. We start saying, God, this is ridiculous. Nothing's changed. It's the same way. It's my fault. And to an extent, that's true. But on the other side of it is there are some things that are outside of our control. And the only thing we can control is how we react and how we respond in those situations. And so last week when I started this whole series, I told you guys, I said, over the course of the next few weeks, we're going to hit 5 checkpoints. That if you're a believer, if you can mark these 5 checkpoints over the course of your journey to get closer to God, to have a deeper relationship with Jesus, if you can hit these 5 checkpoints, it'll make all the difference in the world. Because there's times where we beat up on ourselves. We look at ourselves in the mirror and we go, I am the worst Christian ever. Or I am the worst husband ever. I'm the worst wife or son or daughter or whatever. We beat ourselves up because the decisions that we try to make, they realize they start falling apart, whether it's somebody unexpectedly got sick, or maybe you got sick, or maybe there was, like for Raquel and I, sometimes there are things that pop up and it pulls us out of our routine for a few days. And so it makes it hard for us to build in and lock in on the things that we want to do sometimes. And so when that starts to happen, we talked last week about we've got to remember that our life is a process. Your life is not you're born and you're there. It's a process that happens. You are a piece of artwork that's being created. You're being chipped away at. You're being refined. Your talents and your gifts are being honed into something that God can use for Him. Your personality is being remolded and reshaped because there is a story that is being written. There's a play that's unfolding around us. And we have been invited to play a part in that story. Aspects of it will follow our journey. They'll follow our story, the parts that we live out. But in the grand scheme of things, like Blake said about the study that they're doing with the youth, the Bible itself, the story of life itself, is a story that God Himself is writing. He is the author. He is the perfecter. He is the finisher. And so as He's writing the story, there are things that are going to happen to us, and we tend to pull away from it and walk away because we forget that the story is not about us. It's actually about God. And the story that unravels in our life, the good things and the bad things, if the character plays the role correctly, it drives people closer to God, including themselves. And so last week we kind of started this whole thing off with checkpoint number 1, talking about sometimes you just got to be still. The first and foremost thing, the first checkpoint you have to hit is you have to be still. And we talked about the sons of Korah and how they understood. They wrote Psalm 46, and they actually wrote it in verse 10 there. They actually kind of quoted God and said, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." It's His story. In the midst of everything that you're experiencing, just stop. to stop and take a look around. And the sons of Korah, they had such a unique perspective on this because they had actually literally watched their ancestors be swallowed up by the earth. So it was something that they had a unique perspective on how strong God really was. And so we walked away last week by saying that when we take time to be still, that when we just stop, and to be still means to completely disengage and disconnect from the striving that we do to better ourselves, and in the fights that we go through, in the trials, that if we will disconnect from that and look around, that being still will allow us to focus on what really matters. And I laugh because this is what I had to do this last week. This is what I had to do this morning. Because sometimes when I hit the ground, my brain is already running and it distracts me from what I need to be looking at. But if we will disconnect, if we will shut everything down, then we can focus on what really matters. And it's hard, though, to focus on what really matters, and it's hard to be still because sometimes, let's be honest, we feel invisible. We feel like nobody sees us. We feel like nobody understands us. We feel like nobody could possibly even begin to wrap their head around what we're going on to. And even like me sometimes, you feel like nobody's listening. Raquel and I have had this conversation before, even in our home. Like, I don't feel like they're listening to us. I'm asking them to do something, but I don't feel like they're listening. Talking about our kids. And listen, I'm going to go ahead and say this, okay? I know I joke around a lot about our kids, but our kids are amazing. They really are. It's been fun to watch them grow and mature and become who Jesus wants them to be and who he's molding them into. It's been a lot of fun to watch. And I know I joke around with you guys a lot, but I feel so unbelievably honored to have been chosen by God to be your father. I really do. And I am so unbelievably proud of you. Now I'll stop my mushy moment here. But the reality is that we've all felt that way. Every single one of us feels that way. Sometimes, well, I don't feel that way. If you say that, and you say, I never feel that way, I'm going to go ahead and call you out. You're a liar. Because every single one of us, because we are human beings, at some point in your life, you will feel invisible, you will feel alone, you will feel not listened to, you will feel like nobody loves you. And when that happens, we really want to get into like the physical side of it, there's some things that happen. When you feel alone, when you feel unimportant, when you feel ignored, when you feel invisible, when you feel like nobody listens to you and you have no outlet, it begins to build things inside of you that lead towards depression. It builds anxiety in your life because, well, I don't know how to act because if I act this way, maybe someone will finally see me, but if I act that way, then they may think less of me, so you pull away even more, and it starts to distance you from the people around you. And then it begins to move, like I said, into depression, and then it builds apathy into your life. If you don't know what apathy is the opposite of sympathy and empathy. Empathy and sympathy are areas of your life where you can feel what somebody else is experiencing, you can identify with them, and then sympathy leads you into doing something about it. That's what grace and mercy are all about. It's empathy and sympathy for the brokenness that we see in the world around us. Apathy, on the other hand, is the lack of all of those things. You just don't care anymore. You just don't care about whether people are hurting. You don't care about whether people are moving closer to Jesus or not. You don't care about whether or not people see Jesus in your life because you feel like, well, I've done all these things, but nobody's actually listening to me. Nobody sees the example that I'm setting in front of them because they're not doing anything with it. And so as a believer, even though you take time to stop and be still, if you feel this way, you are not alone. Because the only way you can deal with this first is by stopping to be still and disengaging from all of those feelings. Because the reality is when all of those feelings start to pour in, not only does it bring you depression and anxiety and apathy and all those things, it also brings fear. Because you begin to be afraid of whether or not you should speak up in any given moment. You begin to be afraid of whether or not people will shun you even more. You begin to be afraid to start cultivating relationships with people, which is the exact opposite of what the Bible calls us to do as Christians. Because we feel like, well, I'm already invisible. Nobody sees me, so why am I even going to put myself out there? We long for someone to see us. The human condition says, I need people around me. I need community. I need people to see me. I need people to know me and to know that I exist, to know that I have something to offer, to know that I am here for them, to know that I love them, to know that I care for them, to know that I have all of these things available. And when we don't feel that way, we shut down. And usually we shut down before we even take the time to be still. But you can't shut down. One of my favorite instances of God kind of doing a preemptive smackdown on somebody is actually with the prophet Jeremiah. Okay, so a little bit of background on Jeremiah. Jeremiah was actually the son of the priest Hilkiah. Okay, when you look at Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, you actually get a list of who all was in power when he became a prophet. So based on all of those names, you can actually track it back and realize that he was called to be a prophet roughly around 620 BC. So 620 years before Jesus came. This would have been right during the last 200 years that would have happened before Israel went into what we call the silent period, the 400 years where there were no prophets, there was no revelation from God prior to Jesus coming. Okay? So he's right towards the end of all of this time frame. And he actually served as a prophet through 5 different kings. But Jeremiah was no different than us because there's this comment that he makes. And you can change kind of the wording on it a little bit, but it's still the same reaction. It's still the same response. In Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 6, Jeremiah says this. He's recounting what happened. He says, "Then I said, Lord, look at God, really, just behold." He says, "I want to show you this because I think you missed this. I don't know how to speak." He says, "God, I want you to see that I do not know how to speak because I think you forgot that I am young. I'm young, so obviously I don't know how to speak. This is something," he goes, I'm too young for this. Nobody's going to see me because I'm too young. I have no reputation because I'm too young. They know who my daddy is, but they've also watched me grow up, and I have absolutely no reputation. Nobody's going to see me, which means they're not going to listen to me. They're not going to hear me. This is part of our same issue that we deal with all the time. God, nobody's going to listen to me. They're not going to care what I have to say. They're not going to care what I live out in front of them because I'm a nobody. I'm invisible to them. I don't have the kind of reputation that they want to hear from. I don't have the skill set. I don't have the job. I don't have all of these things in place. God's response to this is something I absolutely love. And he actually does it in the verse before Jeremiah actually even opens his mouth. Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5, he says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you." In other words, before you were born, I already planned to make you holy. And at that point in time, I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. God didn't even give him didn't give him an option to even speak his objection. Before he ever opened his mouth, God already was trying to get him to stop. I kind of picture it this way. Have you ever been having a conversation with someone and they start to open their mouth and you just jump in there, whoa, 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 whoa. This is what I picture happening here. Jeremiah is feeling this call in his life, okay? And if you don't know, I know that's kind of a weird thing. He was called to be a prophet. I was called into ministry. It's nothing more than God saying, you have a passion for this, and I've gifted you for this. So now go and run with it, Okay? That's what it means to be called. Okay? Not everybody is called to do what I do, but all of us are called to ministry. But because of these things, we don't do it. Because we feel like we're too invisible or too unimportant to be seen or heard. They don't know me. As soon as this starts to unfold, God starts to speak, and Jeremiah goes in. He's like, oh, God, no, listen. You just got to pay attention. I'm too young. Nobody's going to listen to me because I don't know how to speak. I'm too invisible. They know my dad. They don't know me. And God speaks in and says, listen, stop saying that you're just a youth, because before you were born, I knew you. And this is the exact same know that is an intimate knowledge of. This is the same type of word that goes so much deeper than just to have a general understanding of. This is, I knew you intimately. I knew everything inside of you. I know you don't think you can do this, but I already saw you. I already know you. I know everything about you. I know everything you will do. I know everything that you're going to do, that you've already done since you've been alive. I know where you're at right now, and I know what you're thinking. That's why I'm telling you, don't say you're a youth. Don't say you're too young, because I know you. I know you. Even in that time, even in that generation, there was this thought process of well, if I'm young, I'm going to be invisible to people. It's the same reason why Paul told Timothy, don't let anybody look down on you because of your youth. But instead, set the example. Live in such a way that they can't help but notice you and pay attention to you. Set the example for other believers in the way that you act, the way that you love, the way that you speak, the way that you think, the way that you live out your life. Set the example in such a way that they can't miss it. Because if you will do that, you will instantly become known by everybody else. Even then, and even now in a lot of our churches, if you're under a certain age, you're told to sit and be quiet because you have nothing to offer. So all we've done in church world is, as soon as somebody gets saved, instead of discipling them and helping them grow deeper and get further into their walk with Christ, we start saying, okay, you're a new believer, you need to sit and be quiet and let me just kind of sit and be a part of it, and we hope you pick some of this stuff up. And so we create generation upon generation upon generation upon generation of Christians who feel invisible to the church and to God and to the rest of the world. And we don't tell them these things because we saw the same exact thing starting to unravel a little bit even with King David years before with the prophet Samuel. Because what God did was he takes this entire mindset of, well, I'm young, so I must be invisible to everybody. God took it and flipped it on its head. Now, if you don't know the story about King David, the nation of Israel begged God and begged God and begged God for a king. And so he said, okay, fine, I'll give you a king. And they said, no, we don't want just any king. We want that guy because he's big, he's strong, he's intimidating. And God said, you have no idea what you're asking for. But in the words of DC Talk, some people got to learn the hard way. And so he allows Saul to be anointed king. Saul becomes king, and things don't go so great. And so finally, God looks at Samuel, and he says, okay, Samuel, they're kind of starting to see the picture here now. So I'm going to send you over to this guy, Jesse, and one of his sons is going to be the next king to replace Saul. And so in 1 Samuel chapter 16, starting in verse 7, Samuel walks up and he says, peaceably, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. He says, basically, I come in peace. He says, I've come to sacrifice peacefully to the Lord, so consecrate yourselves and come with me to make this sacrifice. He says, I need you to be involved in this because every single one of you, there's something at stake. God sees you, God knows you, but I need you to be ready and pure and holy in front of God. So we're going to consecrate ourselves now. We're going to bring ourselves into the presence of God. So he says, I come peacefully to make a sacrifice. So go do whatever you need to do to go ahead and prepare yourself to come into the presence of God, and we're going to make this sacrifice. And so it says, he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they came, he looked at Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointed is right here. But the Lord said to Samuel, don't do that. Don't look at his appearance or his height. Don't look at how tall he is. Don't look at how big he is, because I've rejected him. Because the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks at on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. God flipped everything that we knew and understood about what people needed and saw and should be looking at. He flipped everything up on his head. Even Samuel, even this man that was a prophet, that God had said, I choose you to go and share these messages. I choose you to go and be my mouthpiece. Even Samuel, who probably should have looked at his own life and said, okay, there's things that people probably wouldn't have chosen me to be a prophet, but God did. Even he came in and said, surely God wants somebody bigger and older, but instead what God did was he took a shepherd boy, who at the time was probably just an early teenager. It said when he came up that he was actually pleasing to look at. He wasn't rugged. He was just an average kid who happened to also be a musician, but who had also relied so heavily on the power of God that he was able to kill a lion and a bear when they came after the sheep. This same kid is the same one who would stand before Goliath, with Goliath looking at him and say, you're just a speck of dust. Why in the world are they sending you out here? David looked at him and basically said, this isn't about me. This is about the God that knows me, who is coming in front of me and who is going to knock you flat on your rear end so I can cut your head off with your own sword. When was the last time that you walked into a scenario? When was the last time you walked into everyday life that when you got up, you looked in the mirror and you could honestly say, man, I feel this big, but because God knows me, I am unstoppable? When was the last time that happened? My guess would be not very often. Because the truth is most of us don't really believe that God genuinely knows us. We know that he knows our shortcomings, and we hope that he sees us when we're doing everything right. But when was the last time that you stopped long enough to be able to say what David said in Psalm 139? Lord, you have searched me and known me. Lord, you have dug into the deepest parts of my life. You have dug into the very core of who I am. You have gone in, you have taken everything apart, and you have just ripped it out, and you have taken it, and you have picked through all the mess, all the gunk, all of those things. When was the last time that you were able to say, Lord, you have searched me and known me, and the reason that I know that is because you formed my inward parts. It was you that knitted me together in my mother's womb. When was the last time that you stopped long enough to go, man, God knows me? David spends a total of 18 verses in this psalm. I skipped over about 12 of them. But he spends a total of 18 verses here saying, God knows me. Not only does he know me, but he intimately knows me because he knitted me together before I was ever born. He knows me inside and out. He knows how many hairs are going to be on the top of my head. He knows how long my toenails have the potential to grow before I need to cut them. He knows how long my beard will get. He already knows whether I'm going to have asthma. He already knows whether I'm going to be someone who's prone to being sick or being healthy. He already knows everything about me. God made me. And because God knows me and because God made me, God can deliver me. And I don't just mean deliver me from like the bad days. I'm talking about he can deliver you out of the pits of everything you have dug yourself into. He can dig you out of your addictions. He can help dig you out of a marriage that's on the verge of collapse. He can dig you out of your depression. He can even dig you out of your anxiety if you'll let him. He can dig you out of a bad relationship with your parents. He can dig you out of financial ruin if you'll let him. He can dig you out of places that you never thought you would ever go. Why? Because he knows you. And David spent 18 verses right here saying, I'm not unknown. He even says, God, where can I go that you can't see me? If I go to the highest mountains, you're there. If I go to the deepest depths of the ocean, you're there. Your spirit follows me everywhere that I go. Even when I fall flat on my face and am far away from you, you still see me. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table in the presence of my enemies. He ends out this psalm. He goes on after the 18th verse. He says, okay, God, since you know me so well and you've done all these things and I believe you can deliver me, you see all of my enemies out here. Can you help a brother out? He says, because you know me and because you see me, I know you can do something about this. I know that you will fight on my behalf because you know me. But the only way you can get to that point is if you will stop and disengage, if you will be still, if you will rapha and disconnect from what you're struggling with, if you will disconnect from where you feel invisible, if you will disconnect from where you feel the most anxiety, if you will disconnect from the place where you feel like there's depression, if you will disconnect from your fear long enough to look around, you will see what really matters. And it's this. You are not alone. Because when you realize that you're known, you realize that you're not alone. When you realize that you are known by the creator of the universe, you will never truly be alone. And see, we have it even a little bit easier than what they did. They believed God was everywhere. They believed he could do anything he wanted to. But we, as 21st century Christians, we have a quote from Jesus that says, I will never leave you or forsake you. I will be with you until the very end of the age. And that means whatever age it is that you breathe your last, the very end of time itself, all the way through into eternity. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. But in order to remember that, you have to hit that second checkpoint. You have to stop and look around and remember that you're not alone because you are known. First checkpoint was be still. If you really want to break it down to a two-word thing this go around, it's be known. Several years ago, I was reading a book by a man named Louis Giglio. We've watched some of his studies here, but he wrote a book called I Am Not, But I Know I Am. It's a great book. If you ever get an opportunity to read it, it really is amazing. And so in there, he actually he does what he likes to call a one-word Bible study. Okay, so what he does is he will take a passage of Scripture and he will start with the first word of that passage. And he will meditate and think on that particular verse all day long, or on that one word all day long, until he can pull every bit of meaning he potentially can out of it. And the particular one he's talking about in the book is right at the beginning of John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word was God, the Word was with God. And he picked it up at the bottom, and the Word became flesh. Now follow his logic here for a minute, because it really is unbelievable. He got to the word became. And he started thinking through it. He said he'd been thinking through it for a couple of hours. And he started realizing, okay, technically there's actually two words here. There's the word be and the word came. Okay. Well, came is obvious. It means that you went from here to here in past tense. The word be, that's interesting. Do you realize that the word be is just a form of the word in the tense of I am? Think about this for a second. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. God's name was told to Moses as I am. And the Word, who was be, I am, came. Well, then you start going the route of taking all kinds of other words like beloved. I am loved. When we take the time and go, I am still in front of God. I am calm and disconnected from all this in front of God. And we go, I am known because I am knows me. It changes things. See, what really matters isn't how well we're known by the people around us. What truly, genuinely matters and deepens our faith to the point where we become unstoppable is the fact that I am. God himself knows us. And if we can remember that we are known by God, we can remember that he goes with us everywhere. And as long as he is with us, there's nothing that we can't tackle. Because there's nothing too big for him. Some of you this morning are sitting here and you're going through stuff in your life right now that goes, well, right now I feel like God's abandoned me. I feel like God's abandoned my family. I feel like he's left me alone. He said, I am with you always. Not just when things are good. I am with you always. David understood that because he went up face to face with a giant with just a few rocks and a sling. He knew that God was with him. That's why he had the courage and the boldness to live out that faith in front of people. It's that same boldness and that same faith that Paul challenged Timothy to live out. It's that same boldness and that same faith that God called Jeremiah to walk in. It's the same boldness and faith that he called Samuel to go and profess who the next king was going to be, even though it didn't line up with what everybody else thought it should be. The life that we live as a Christian is a life that is beyond anything else that the rest of our world looks like. In honesty, if you really want to know why we're invisible to the world, it's because we look too much like the world. We're called to live in the world, but to not look like the world. Because if we literally live the life and set the example that Jesus calls us to set, we will not look the same. So my question to you is this: if you feel invisible, who do you feel invisible to? The world or to God? If you feel invisible to God, then you need to stop and be still and remember that you're known. If you feel invisible to the rest of the world, then you need to stop, be still, and remember that you are known by the God of the universe. Everybody else is just icing on the cake. Because it's him and him alone who makes life worth living. You can fall flat on your face, but he will be there every single time. You can make all the best and wisest choices in the world, and it's not going to make him see you any more than he already does. All he calls us to do is be faithful. Because he knows what you're capable of. Because he knows you intimately. Some of you this morning are sitting here and you feel invisible, and I'm here to tell you, you're not invisible to God. Because he came to this earth for you. So, well, he didn't even know me yet. But he did. Because he knew you and knit you together in your mother's womb. From the foundations of time, he knew you. I don't understand it all, but I believe it. When we fight our battles on a daily basis, we can't fight them through our power. Because if we do, we'll fail every time. But if we can remember that there is a God that knows us and knows us so well that he is with us, then we can remember that we need to let him fight the battles for us. In just a second, the band's going to come up. And I really want to ask you, I want to challenge you to do something. I want you to stop where you are. And I want you to let your mind disconnect from all of the things that are happening in your world right now. Good, bad, indifferent, in between, whatever. Let your mind disconnect from it. And stop long enough to say, God, remind me that you know me. Remind me that I'm not alone, that I'm not invisible, and remind me that you love me. Now, if you're in this room and you say, well, I've never really done this whole Jesus thing, it's okay. Because sometimes the first thing that needs to happen for you to actually be able to even move towards being in that place where you can say, man, I believe God is who he says he is. First thing you have to do is know that he sees you. Because how can somebody love you if they don't see you or know you? So the first thing you need to do is understand and let him actually show you that he does in fact know you and that he loves you. Because Jesus didn't just come for the ones that have it all together. He didn't come for the ones that would always make the right decisions, that would always say the right words, the ones who would be extremely intelligent, the ones who would have really solid reputations. No, he came literally for everyone. He came for me, he came for you. He came for the people that run our country. He even came for the people who are on the other side of the world that don't even like us. He came for all of them. If he loves them enough to come for them, why in the world wouldn't he love you enough to come for you too? Whatever questions you have that you need answered, come talk to me. I will help you find the answers that you need. Because I believe so much that when we realize that we're known, we realize that we're not alone. Father, thank you so much for who you are. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for caring so much about us that you would even want to take the time to knit us together. That you would even take the time to know us in ways we never thought possible. Father, whatever internal battles are going on in people's hearts and in their minds this morning, however invisible they may feel, God, whatever that battle is that's moved them to that place, my hope and my prayer is that this morning that they would disconnect from that battle. And they would stop long enough to hear you say, I see you. And I see you because I know you. And I know you because I love you. Father, help us to take ourselves out of the equation so that you can fight our battles for us, the internal, the external, and everything in between. Father, we love you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.